To understand why my son could look me in the eye and say I didn't belong at my own wife's wake, you need to know something I spent years trying not to admit out loud. For a long time, he wasn't completely wrong about me. I wasn't always the man standing at the back of that room in a too big suit, hands shaking because he couldn't find a place to stand. I used to be the man everyone whispered about. When my son was little, he didn't have a fun dad. He had a wild card. Some weeks, I was the father who threw him in the air in the backyard and taught him how to skip rocks at the lake. Other weeks, I was the guy who stumbled in after midnight, reeking of cheap beer and bad decisions, mumbling apologies his mother had heard too many times. Anna, my wife, married a charming idiot. I knew how to make people laugh, talk my way into jobs, into bars, into one more chance. I didn't know how to sit still with myself when the noise stopped. My son saw more than we thought he did. You think kids are asleep, but they're counting how many times the front door opens after midnight. They're memorizing the sound of bottles in the trash, the way their mother's voice changes from hopeful to resigned. One night he waited at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, clutching a stuffed dinosaur, maybe 8 years old. "Mom said you missed my game," he said, flat. I mumbled something about work. He looked at the bottle in my hand and said, "You smell like work." That sentence lodged in my spine. Anna threatened to leave more than once, packed a bag, twice, made it to her sister's house once. Every time I cried, promised I'd change. Every time I believed it in the moment. Every time I slipped. My son watched all of it. Somewhere in there, he decided he had to be the man of the house because his father wasn't. My bottom came with blue lights in the rear view, and my son's face pressed to the front window. I got pulled over 3 blocks from home. The breathalyzer didn't care about my excuses. They towed the car, put me in the back of the cruiser, and as we passed our street, I saw him standing barefoot in the yard, looking at me like he didn't know who I was. The next morning, after bail and calls and losing my job, Anna sat me at the kitchen table. "This is it," she said. "Go get help. Real help. Meetings, a sponsor, a plan. If you don't, you sleep somewhere else." I didn't get sober out of pure nobility. At first, I did it because I was scared of prison, of dying drunk, of killing someone. The love part came later. The meetings were in a church basement that smelled like coffee and regret. I heard my story out of other men's mouths, different details, same shame. I came home sober with my hands shaking, and my son would be at the table doing homework, barely looking up. "How was your thing?" he'd ask, like it was a fad I'd drop. You don't get a medal for finally doing the bare minimum. Sobriety didn't make me a hero. It made me almost decent. For a long time, he didn't owe me forgiveness. He owed me nothing. But Anna watched. She saw me show up to meetings, pour out bottles, avoid old haunts, drag myself to every school event like I was walking through mud. Years went by. My son graduated high school. I was sober in the photos. Our marriage got quieter. Not perfect, but less chaos. Once, on our anniversary, she slipped her hand into mine on the couch and rested her head on my shoulder. "She almost left," she whispered. "I know," I said. "I'm glad I didn't," she answered. That was the first time I believed she might actually mean it. Then she got sick. At first it was, "I'm just tired," then bruises that came from nowhere, then doctors and tests, and that word, leukemia. Fear changes everything. Suddenly every stupid fight we'd ever had felt like time we'd burned for nothing. The next few years were hospital corridors, beeping machines, plastic chairs. I slept in a recliner beside her bed, ran for ginger ale when nothing would stay down, held her hair when the chemo made her violently sick. My son helped too. Flowers on weekends, short visits, making her laugh with stories from work. But he had his own life by then. Job, wife, obligations. He loved her, no question. But most days it was me in the chair when the nurses came around. If I mentioned concerns to him, she seems weaker after this new round, or we should ask the doctor about that cough, he'd bristle. You're not a doctor, Dad, he'd say. Old patterns. He still trusted me least when it mattered most. One quiet night in the hospital, after he'd gone home, she reached over and took my hand. You're going to have to stop doing that, she murmured. Doing what? I asked. Shrinking, she said. Every time he looks at you like you're dirt, you make yourself smaller so you don't upset him. You did that with me for years. I forgave you. You know that, right? I swallowed. I don't deserve it. She said, maybe not. But I gave it anyway. You've been here. Really here. A long time now. You don't have to let him keep punishing you for who you used to be. A few weeks later, on a decent day, we sat out back under a blanket and talked about the one thing we'd avoided, what happens after. Promise me you won't let them turn my death into some big production I never wanted. I don't want a big church funeral. I don't want a fancy box. I want to be cremated and scattered at the lake. That's where we were us. She reached into her cardigan and handed me a small white envelope with my name on it and a business card tucked behind it. I met with a lawyer, signed papers. Those papers say you're in charge of my funeral. Not him, not my sisters, you. Inside is a letter from me and a copy of what I signed. If they try to shut you out, you show them. And if that's not enough, you call her. Promise me you'll choose what I asked for, even if it makes him angry. I said, he's going to hate me. She replied, he might. For a while. But this isn't about what he wants or what you want. It's about what I want. You already betrayed him once. You've been trying to make up for that ever since. But you don't get to spend the rest of your life saying yes to his pain if it means saying no to me. She closed my fingers around the envelope. Her hand was cool. Mine was shaking. She repeated, promise me. I looked at the woman who had every right to die hating me and chose instead to trust me with her last wish. I said, I promise. I meant it. I just didn't understand how much it would cost to keep that promise. Until the day our son stood between me and her casket, told me I didn't belong at my own wife's wake. And I went home to that envelope on the table, waiting to see which version of me would pick it up. I stared at the phone like it was a weapon, and I was the idiot who'd already shot myself in the foot once. The envelope lay open on the table now, her handwriting shaking slightly on the page, but her words clear as day. She'd started with the soft things, because that's who she was. Thank you for staying. Thank you for getting help. I know who you are now, not just who you were. Then the other part. The part in firm, underlined sentences that made my chest tight. I do not want a big church funeral. I do not want to be embalmed and laid out in a casket. I want to be cremated. I want my ashes scattered at the lake. I have signed legal instructions naming you as the person in charge of these decisions. If anyone tries to shut you out, call lawyer's name. She has everything. Please don't let fear of our son's anger make you break your promise. Those words, fear of our son's anger, hit harder than anything else. She saw it. She'd seen me fold myself up every time he bristled, trade my opinions for peace, swallow my needs to avoid setting him off. Have you ever realized the person you loved most not only knew your worst habits, but planned around them? I picked up the business card. The letters on it looked too sharp in the half-light of the kitchen. Late hour or not, my thumb found the numbers.
It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. "This is Marissa Cole?" My throat felt dry. Marissa, my name's Tom Harris," I said. "My wife was Anna Harris. She said you'd have some papers for her about what she wanted for." I couldn't make myself say her body. Couldn't get funeral past the lump in my throat. There was a short silence, but not the impatient kind. "Yes," she said softly. "Anna told me you might call. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Harris." I squeezed my eyes shut. "She died 3 days ago," I managed. "My son, he's arranging this big church funeral. Casket, the whole thing. She didn't want that. She told me. She wrote a letter. She said you had legal instructions." Paper rustled on the other end. "I do," Marissa said. "Your wife came to see me months ago. She executed a legal document giving you sole authority over her final arrangements. We filed it with the funeral home she listed and with her medical records. Did anyone mention that?" My jaw clenched. "No," I said. "If they got it, nobody said a word." "Which funeral home are you working with?" I gave her the name. More rustling. A keyboard clacking. She said after a moment, "They received a copy. I'm looking at the confirmation now. It appears they're proceeding with plans that contradict her directive." Heat flared in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. "Can they do that?" I asked. "If the son insists, he's been very involved. They shouldn't. Not lawfully. Funeral homes like to keep families happy, but their job is to follow the legal funeral agent, not the loudest relative." A shaky laugh escaped me. "That would be him." "Do you have time to come into my office in the morning? We can go over everything together and then contact them formally. The sooner we stop things, the less mess there will be." I thought of deposits already paid, church services already announced, people already arranging their black clothes. I already signed some papers for a casket, for burial. Saying it made me feel physically sick. I thought I might do both. Let him have his show, then do what she wanted later. I know that sounds stupid. "It sounds human," she replied. "But if her directive predates those arrangements, we can correct course. It might be uncomfortable, but it's not impossible." Uncomfortable. That was one word for it. "I'm going to hate me," I whispered. "He already does," she said, not unkindly. "The question is whether you're willing to let your fear of that hate make you betray what Anna clearly asked for." That landed like a gavel. "Come in at 9, she added. "Bring the letter she wrote you. We'll handle this together." I hung up feeling like I'd stepped off a cliff and only realized on the way down there might be a net. Sleep didn't come. My mind replayed every fight, every beer bottle, every time I'd chosen myself over them. And then on top of that, the image of my son's face at the wake, pinched with rage as he told me I didn't belong. Over and over, another question clawed at me. Was I doing this for her, or to finally prove to someone, anyone, that I wasn't the man I used to be? Morning came whether I was ready or not. The world had the nerve to look normal. Cars passed outside. A dog barked down the street. I put on the same suit I'd worn to the wake, smoothed the wrinkled tie, and tucked Anna's letter into my inside pocket like armor. Marissa's office was in a low brick building between a nail salon and a tax place. Nothing fancy. Her waiting room had 2 chairs, a plant that looked real enough, and a stack of outdated magazines. She came out herself to get me. Mid-40s, maybe, with tired eyes but a firm handshake. "Mr. Harris, come on back." Her office walls were lined with books and a few watercolor paintings of the lake. Our lake. That hit me harder than any law text could have. You picked her, I said, nodding at them. On purpose? We talked about it a lot, she replied, gesturing for me to sit, about why it mattered to her, about how hard it might be for you to stand up for what she wanted. She knew your son's feelings about you. That's one way to put it, I muttered. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a copy of the directive she'd filed, Anna's name neatly printed at the top, the paragraphs underneath leaving no room for interpretation. I hereby designate my husband, Thomas Harris, as the person authorized to make all decisions regarding the disposition of my remains and funeral arrangements. It went on. I do not want a traditional church funeral or burial. I request cremation and a simple memorial at the lakeside where my family and I spent many happy days. It was dated months before her final hospitalization. Signed. Witnessed. Legal. Seeing it in black and white, official and undeniable, made my stomach twist. This wasn't just a conversation on a porch I could pretend I'd misremembered. This was the last clear decision she'd made about herself. This is what she wanted, Marissa said quietly, and she chose you to carry it out. I don't know if I'm strong enough, I admitted. The words surprised me. I hadn't meant to be that honest with a stranger. I spent half her childhood taking the easy way out, the bottle, the bar, anywhere but home. Now I'm supposed to take the hard way and risk losing him for good. You already lost his approval a long time ago, she said, not cruelly, just fact. What you have left is your integrity and your promise to your wife. She picked up her phone. I'm going to call the funeral home. I'll email them a fresh copy of this directive and remind them that proceeding with burial against the wishes of the legal funeral agent could create liability for them. Then we'll call the church. The idea of calling the church, like we were canceling a dentist appointment, made sweat bead on my upper lip. Do you need me to say anything? I asked. Not yet, she said. Let me set the legal foundation, then you can decide how you want to handle your son. She put the call on speaker so I could hear. The funeral director's smooth, practiced voice answered. When Marissa introduced herself and mentioned Anna's full name, his tone changed, went careful. When she brought up the directive, there was a pause. We have that on file, he conceded. But her son is not the legal decision maker. Mr. Harris is. You've made arrangements that contradict a binding pre-need directive. I'm calling to make sure we correct that before you proceed further. He cleared his throat. We've already scheduled the viewing and the church service. The viewing can proceed as planned if my client agrees, but final disposition must be cremation, not burial. The service itself does not have to be in a church if that contradicts her wishes. I could almost hear him calculating business implications on the other end. We'll adjust accordingly, he said finally. I'll note cremation as final disposition and hold off on any burial vault purchases. But her son will have to speak with his father. And if he has legal questions, he's welcome to call me. She hung up, then looked at me. Now the church. My stomach dropped. She dialed. The pastor's voice was familiar. He'd married us, baptized our son. When Marissa explained, he sighed. I wish Anna had come to me directly,
He said. She did, I almost blurted, but bit my tongue. Marissa was gentle but firm. All we're asking is that you understand there may not be a full funeral service here, she said. There may be a smaller memorial later, or a simple prayer at the lake. The family is working through it. He sounded hurt but not surprised. I always knew she had one foot out of the sanctuary and one in the woods, he said. If this is what she wrote, I'll respect it. I'll cancel the formal booking, but I'm available if they'd like me to pray with them at the lake or at home. When she hung up, something unclenched in my chest I hadn't realized was tight. So that's it? I asked. Just like that, the big funeral is off? Legally, yes, she said. Practically, your son is not going to be happy. He can't change the law, but he can make your life very difficult if you let his emotions dictate your next moves. I ran a hand over my face. How do I tell him? I asked. That I went behind his back and undid everything he thought he was doing for her. You didn't go behind his back, she corrected. You stepped into the role your wife gave you. If you want, I can be present when you tell him, or we can invite him here. But this has to come from you at some point. Otherwise, he'll always believe someone stole his mother's funeral from him. We agreed to meet at the funeral home that afternoon. Marisha would be there, the director, me, my son if he came. He did. I knew he would the second my phone buzzed with a text full of question marks and why is the funeral home calling me about changes? I replied, meet me there at 3. We'll talk. 3 o'clock came too fast. He stormed into the quiet little office like a storm in a suit, his wife trailing behind him with her lips pressed thin. What is going on? He demanded. They said something about cremation? About canceling the church? Tell me this is some mix-up. The funeral director looked like he wanted to evaporate. Marissa nodded to me, then spoke. Your mother executed a funeral directive, she said, legally naming your father as the person in charge of her arrangements. In that directive, she requested cremation and a simple memorial at the lake. The plans made so far contradict that. We're here to align everything with her wishes. His head whipped toward me. You did this? He said, voice low and dangerous. You couldn't stand that I was handling it, so you ran to some lawyer to cancel Mom's funeral? I held up the letter. My hands weren't as steady as I wanted, but I didn't back down. She did this, I said, months ago, before she got really bad. She met with Marissa, she signed it, she told me, and she wrote this. I handed it to him. For a second, he refused to take it. Then he snatched it, eyes scanning the page. I watched the color in his face shift as he hit the lines about no church funeral, no casket, the lake, the forgiveness, the part where she said she trusted me to carry this out. This isn't her, he said finally, voice cracking. She would never... He looked up, eyes bright with betrayal. You manipulated her. You got in her head when she was scared and made her put this on paper so you could feel like the hero. Rage flared up my spine, quick and hot. I didn't get in her head, I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. She was clearer than I've ever seen her. She wanted peace, not a performance. She wanted the lake. She wanted me to have one thing I didn't screw up. She told me she wanted a church, he insisted, clinging to it like a lifeline. She said she missed the hymns. She said she wanted everyone there. She may have said she missed singing. She may have said she didn't want people to forget her. You turned that into this because it made sense for you. But this, I tapped the paper in his hand, this is what she took the time to write down when no one was looking. This is what she was afraid you wouldn't hear if she said it out loud. Tears spilled over now. Anger, hurt, all of it. So what, we just don't get a funeral? No church, no wake? Just scatter her like she was nothing? We get her funeral, I said quietly. Not yours, not mine. Hers. We can still have a gathering. People can still speak, sing, cry. But we do it where she asked us to. Not in a room she left years ago because it didn't feel like home anymore. He shook his head, looking at Marissa like she might swoop in and say, just kidding, it's optional. Can't I override this? He asked her. I'm her son. Doesn't that mean anything? It means a lot emotionally, she said. Legally, no. She chose your father. Courts are very reluctant to overrule a clear directive without evidence of fraud or incapacity, and given the date and her medical records at the time, I doubt any judge would say she didn't know what she was signing.
For a long moment, the only sound in the room was his breathing. Then he crumpled the letter in his fist, straightened it back out as if realizing what he was doing, and slammed it on the table. "Fine," he said, voice hoarse. "Do whatever you want. Burn her. Throw her in the lake. Just know you took this from me." He turned to go. "I took nothing from you," I said to his back. "She gave this to me. I'm just finally not too scared to accept it." He paused at the door but didn't look back. "When she looks down and sees this joke of a goodbye, don't come crying to me about how you honored her." "She's not looking down on anyone," I replied softly. "She's already where she wanted to be. We're the ones still trying to catch up." He left. The door clicked shut instead of slamming, which somehow hurt more. I sank into the chair like my bones had given out. "You did the right thing," Marissa said. "It doesn't feel like it," I admitted. "It feels like I just buried what was left of my relationship with my son." "You didn't bury it," she said. "You just stopped letting his version of you bury your wife's wishes." Outside, the world went on as if nothing had happened. Inside, the course of my wife's last request had finally shifted onto the track she'd marked out. Whatever came next, it would at least be honest.
We held her real goodbye at the lake a week later. Not the wake with the shiny box and the lilies that made her sneeze even when she was alive. That had already happened, and there was no taking it back. People had cried over a version of her she never wanted to be. I couldn't change that, but I could change what happened next. The cremation was quiet. No one sees that part. You sign papers, answer questions, hand over the body you once held warm and breathing. They take her down a hallway you're not allowed to follow. You sit in a waiting room that smells like cleaning solution and old magazines, and you try not to think too hard about what final disposition actually means. When they gave me the urn, I almost dropped it. It was heavier than it looked, lighter than she should have been. We chose a day with decent weather, as if the sky owed us that much. I called the people she'd actually spent time with in the last few years. The hospice nurse who'd braided her hair when she was too weak, the neighbor who'd brought casseroles without making a show of it, a couple of women from her book club, my sister. I told them, we're doing a small memorial at the lake. That's what she wanted. Some of them hesitated. What about the church service? One asked. Wasn't there going to be... There was, I said. She didn't want it. Most of them came anyway. Pastor Jim showed up too, even though his building hadn't hosted a grand send-off. He wore his collar, but he left the big Bible at home, carrying only a small, worn book in his coat pocket. She always said she felt closer to God out here than she ever did under stained glass, he told me, as we stood by the water. If she's right, she's listening now. I held the urn like it might run away. The spot we chose was the same little curve of shoreline where we used to bring our son when he was small. There was a tree with low branches he used to climb, a patch of flat rocks where we'd sat side by side, watching him splash, our shoulders touching. The water was calm that day, just a few lazy ripples breaking the surface. People stood in a loose half circle. No organ music, no microphones, just wind and birds, and the occasional car on the road behind us. Pastor Jim said a few words, simple and kind. No talk of punishment or reward, just stories about how she'd shown up with pies at potlucks no one else wanted to cook for, how she'd sat with lonely people at the end of the pew. My sister read a poem Anna had underlined in a book once. I said a few things too. Not about my guilt, not about my sober years, but about her. How she snorted when she laughed too hard. How she'd dance in the kitchen when a song she liked came on, even if she was stirring soup.
how she'd once driven halfway across town in a snowstorm because our science project had fallen apart and she refused to let him face the teacher without trying again. For the first time since she died, I talked about her without explaining myself. About halfway through, I heard tires on gravel, a car door slamming. I didn't turn around, not at first. I just felt the energy shift, the way it does when someone walks into a room full of their own story. I heard his voice, low, asking my sister where to stand. She pointed him toward the group. He didn't come all the way in, just hovered at the edge, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the urn. Anger still sat on his shoulders, but it looked heavier now, less sharp, more like something he was carrying than something he was swinging. When it was time, I walked down to the water's edge. My legs felt wobbly, like the first day I walked into that basement meeting years ago. Everyone hung back, giving me space. I unscrewed the top of the urn. For a second, my hand froze. This was it. No putting her back. No do-overs. "You ready?" my sister whispered behind me. I nodded. "Hey, Anna," I said under my breath, looking out at the water. "We made it." I poured. The ashes fell in a soft, gray stream, catching the light like dust in a sunbeam before the lake took them. Some clung to the surface for a moment, swirling, then sank. A breeze picked up and carried a thin veil of her farther out. I thought I'd feel something dramatic, her presence, some sign. Instead, I felt quiet. Not the suffocating kind, the kind that comes after you've finally done the hard, right thing you've been putting off. When it was over, people came up one by one, dropping flowers or small stones at the water's edge, saying their own private goodbyes. Pastor Jim put a hand on my shoulder and prayed a short, gentle blessing that didn't try to explain away the unfairness of any of it. When most everyone had drifted back to the parking lot, I realized my son was still there. He hadn't moved closer, but he hadn't left either. He stood with his hands jammed into his coat pockets, staring at the spot where the ashes had disappeared. I walked over slowly, leaving a respectful distance between us, long enough for him to decide if he wanted to step in or walk away. "I came," I said. Obvious, but it was all I had. He swallowed. His jaw worked. "Mom loved this place," he said finally. His voice sounded like gravel. "I forgot how much." "Yeah, she did." We stood there a while, side by side, not looking at each other, watching the ripples. A duck swam by, completely indifferent to our drama. "He said the letter," he said at last, quiet. I read it again, all of it. My heart thumped. "Yeah? She really wrote that stuff," he said like he still couldn't quite make himself believe it. About trusting you, saying you were there for her at the end, saying she forgave you." I nodded. My throat was too tight to answer. "He wanted to be the one to give her something, to fix what you broke." The honesty stung, but it was a clean sting. "I know," I said. "I know you did." "When I saw these people out here," he gestured at the small group behind us, "and not a packed church, I thought she didn't matter, that you were making it small because you were ashamed." I thought of her words on the porch. "I don't want a big production. I want peace." "She didn't want a crowd," I said. "She wanted this. Us. The lake. You were the only thing she was ever afraid she wouldn't get here." He went very still at that. "She told you that?" "Not like that, but close enough." We let the silence stretch again. This time, it didn't feel like a wall, more like a blanket we weren't sure how to pull around us. "I still think you screwed up a lot," he said eventually. "No heat in it, just fact. You did a number on us when I was a kid." "I know," I said. There was nothing else to say to that wouldn't sound like a defense. And I'm still mad, he added quickly, like he needed to stake that flag before anything else. About the wake, about the church, about all of it. I know, I repeated. You have a right to be. He exhaled hard, a cloud in the cold air. But he stared at the water. She wouldn't have written what she wrote if she didn't mean it. His voice dropped. And she wouldn't have picked you to do this if she thought you'd screw it up. That this wasn't just about the ashes. It was about the promise, the choice, the version of me she believed in at the end. No, I said. She wouldn't. He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "The lilies were stupid. She hated those." I huffed out a laugh before I could stop it. She did. He said, "Sunflowers would have been better. Too cheerful for a funeral, though." Maybe that was the point. He finally glanced at me then, just a quick sideways look. This felt more like her, he admitted, nodding toward the lake. Then that. He didn't have to explain what that meant. The casket, the carpet, the velvet, the words spoken for other people's comfort. Yeah, I said. Me too. We didn't hug. We didn't cry on each other's shoulders. He didn't say he was sorry for the wake, and I didn't ask him to. He just shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and said, "I've got to get back. Work." "I know," I said. "Thanks for coming." He hesitated, then gave the slightest nod and walked back toward the parking lot. Halfway there, he stopped and turned around. "Hey," he called. I looked up. "What?" "Next time you decide to change something big, maybe tell me before the lawyer does." It was the closest thing to a truce offer I was going to get. "I'll try," I said. "If you try to listen before you throw me out of a room." One corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile.
No promises, he said. But he didn't sound as certain as he had at the wake. After he left, I sat down on one of the flat rocks by the water. The wind picked up, cool on my face. I thought about all the ways this could have gone. The easier ones where I kept my mouth shut, let him have his big church scene, let the pastor talk about a woman she hadn't been in years. I would have stayed the villain in his eyes, but at least I wouldn't have had to see that look when he realized I'd gone against him. Instead, I'd chosen the harder path, the one where I did what she asked, knowing full well it might cost me whatever thin thread still tied me to my son. Sitting there on that rock, watching the light hit the water where I'd just let her go, I realized something I wished I'd understood sooner. Sometimes being a parent isn't about taking the blame or taking the lead. Sometimes it's about taking the hit so the person you love doesn't have to betray themselves. She'd done that for me more times than I could count. This was, finally, me doing it once for her. The grief didn't lift. The guilt didn't magically disappear. But for the first time since she died, I felt like I hadn't failed her when it mattered most. Whether my son ever forgave me or not, that part was between him and the woman whose ashes now swirled in the water at our feet. If you'd asked me years ago what justice looked like, I probably would have told you it was me getting punished, losing my license, sleeping on couches, being the villain in my son's stories. I thought if I just took every hit, swallowed every insult, let every old mistake be dragged into every new moment, that somehow it would even out. That's what guilt does. It convinces you that letting people keep stepping on you is the only proof you're really sorry. Standing by that lake, ashes on the water, and my son's back retreating toward his car, I finally understood something different.
There's a difference between accepting responsibility and accepting a life sentence. For years, I let him freeze me in the worst version of myself because a part of me believed I didn't deserve to be seen as anything else. Every time he rolled his eyes at me or dismissed what I said about his mother's care, I shrank a little more and told myself, "You earned this. This is your penance." But here's what nobody told me. When you let someone hold you hostage to who you used to be, you're not just betraying yourself. You're betraying the people who believed you could be more. My wife didn't go to that lawyer because she thought I was perfect. She knew every ugly thing I'd ever done. She'd lived it. She chose me for this anyway. She looked at the man who sat by her hospital bed, who went to meetings, who missed barbecues to stay sober, and she decided that version of me was real enough to trust with her last wish. If I had stayed quiet, let the church show go on, let my son's idea of a proper funeral steamroll what she'd written, I wouldn't have just been keeping the peace. I would have been telling her, "You were wrong to believe I'd changed. You were wrong to put this in my hands." That's the part that broke something in me more than my son's words at the wake. Not being told to leave, not being called out in front of everyone, realizing that the only person I'd be truly betraying by staying small was the woman whose ashes I was pouring into that water. People like to talk about doing it for the kids. Get sober for the kids. Stay miserable for the kids. Swallow your truth for the kids. Nobody says, one day those kids will grow up and they'll need you to stop letting their childhood pain decide every choice you make. My son had every right to be angry about the father I was. He did not have the right to rewrite his mother's goodbye because he liked the story where I was always wrong better than the one where she and I wrote something together at the end. That was the line. Not because my feelings were hurt, but because her wishes were on the other side of it. If you've ever spent years trying to make up for who you used to be, you probably know that instinct I fought at that kitchen table. Put the envelope away, sign what they want, don't rock the boat. Let them be right about you. It feels safer than risking fresh anger. But here's the thing I wish someone had told me sooner. You can carry guilt and still stand up. You can say, "Yes, I hurt you," and also, "No, I'm not going to help you hurt someone else, even if someone else is already gone." Calling that lawyer, enforcing that directive, canceling that big church funeral, none of that erased the nights my son went to bed wondering if his dad would come home. It didn't make me some noble hero. It just made me a man who, for once, chose the right promise to keep. My son may never fully forgive me for the past. He may always remember the empty chair at his game more vividly than the times I sat in the stand sober. That's his to work through. What's mine is knowing that, when it counted, I didn't let his anger scare me into breaking my word to his mother. If there's anything I've learned from all this, it's that family stories are powerful. My son's story about me has always been simple. Dad the screw-up, the guy who made mom cry, the man who didn't deserve a front row seat to her grief. For a long time, I lived down to that story because I thought it was the only one available. But my wife wrote another version in that letter. One where I was the man who stayed, the man who could be trusted to do the hard thing when she couldn't speak for herself. In the end, choosing which story to live by didn't change the facts of my past. It changed what I did with my present. Maybe your kid hasn't kicked you out of a wake. Maybe your ghost is a divorce, an affair, an addiction, years you missed. Maybe the punishment isn't as dramatic as a scene at a funeral home. Maybe it's just that look they give you. The one that says, "I know who you really are," no matter how long it's been. You don't erase that with one brave phone call. But you also don't honor it by letting it govern every choice you make, especially when someone else's dignity is on the line. I can't tell you that standing up for my wife's wishes fixed anything overnight. It didn't. My son is still sorting through a childhood that hurt him,
I'm still sitting in meeting rooms and on this rock by the water, sorting through the man I used to be and the one I am now. What I can tell you is this. When I think about her now, I don't see that shiny casket and those lilies that made her sneeze. I see the lake. I see the way the light hit the water when I opened my hand and let her go. I see my son, just at the edge of things, watching, and admitting, even if he couldn't quite say the words, that this felt more like her. That's enough for me. Enough to know that for once, I didn't choose the easier shame over the harder right. Enough to keep me sitting here, talking to her on the wind, hoping that wherever she is, she can see that the man she believed in at the end is still trying to show up, even if that means her son has to learn to see him too, in his own time.
I knew the wake was wrong from the moment I walked into the room. It wasn't just the lilies, though she hated those, that bothered me. It was the whole scene. The heavy velvet curtains, the glossy casket she joked she'd haunt me for buying, the slideshow of her life playing on loop under church-style music she'd stopped listening to years ago. It looked like a funeral for the woman everyone thought she was, not the one she'd actually become. My son was in his element at the front. Black suit, perfectly pressed, tie straight, doing what good sons are supposed to do. Shaking hands, hugging people, accepting every "you did her proud" with a tight little nod that said he needed those words like oxygen. Every time someone said, "Your mom would be so happy with this," a part of me wanted to stand up and shout, "No, she wouldn't." Instead, I hovered in the back, fingers digging into the edge of a folding chair, playing the ghost at my own wife's goodbye. Then he cleared his throat and stepped up in front of the casket for his little speech. "Mom was the heart of this family," he said, voice shaking just enough to make people lean in. "She loved this church, these traditions. She always told me she wanted a proper send-off." Proper. The word hit me like a slap. She'd told me the exact opposite. No big church, no fancy box, no parade of people filing past her body. She wanted the lake. She wanted quiet. She wanted us. Standing there, listening to him rewrite her wishes as if they were gospel, something in me twisted so hard it might as well have been physical. Have you ever been so full of truth that staying silent felt like choking? After the speech, people started moving again. Coffee cups clinked, chairs scraped. An old friend leaned over to me and whispered, "Didn't she tell you she wanted something different?" That was the tinder. I walked down the aisle, because I couldn't not anymore. Every step toward that casket felt like walking against a current made of my own history. Every bottle, every broken promise, every fight bouncing off the walls in my head. When I reached her, I didn't say anything at first. I just looked down at her face, too smooth, too still, and thought, "This isn't you." Then I felt that hand on my arm, hard, claiming. You know what he said next. "You don't get to stand over her like you loved her. You lost that right. Get out." In that moment, with all those eyes on us and all those years between us, I understood two things at once. He wasn't just talking about the wake, and if I walked out of there without saying a word, I would be agreeing with him. I wasn't kicked out just because of who I'd been. I was being kicked out because I'd let his version of me run the show for so long that he genuinely believed I had no right to argue with him about anything, not even his mother's last wish. I could have fought right there, thrown all his absences in his face, pointed out every night he hadn't visited her at the hospital because he couldn't handle seeing her like that. I could have pulled the envelope from my pocket and waved it like evidence in front of the whole room. But that would have turned her wake into a trial, with me on one side, him on the other, and her stuck in the middle like a prop. So I did the thing I'd always done when it came to him. I backed up. I walked out.
Let everyone think whatever they wanted. Let him feel like he'd protected her from me one last time. Only this time, when I stepped into the cold air outside and felt it hit me, I knew something fundamental had changed. Because for the first time, backing away from him didn't feel like doing the right thing. It felt like betrayal. Not of him, of her. At home, the house was the same as when we'd left for the hospital weeks earlier. Her shoes by the door, her book half finished on the nightstand, her mug in the sink. It was like the walls still believed she might walk back through the door and finish whatever she'd been in the middle of. I dropped my keys on the counter and stared at the table where we'd argued about the funeral, where he'd pushed contracts at me and I'd signed because it was easier, because I told myself I'd fix it later. That's where I saw it again. The envelope. White. Small. My name on the front in her hand. It had been sitting there like a question I kept refusing to answer. I picked it up. My fingers shook, but I didn't put it down this time. I opened it and read her words, really read them. Not the way you skim when you're looking for reasons to avoid doing what you know you have to do. I read the part where she said she forgave me. Not with a fairy tale wipe of everything I'd done, but with eyes wide open. I read the part where she said she trusted me to do this because of who I'd been in the years since I got sober, not who I'd been before. And I read the part where she said in ink that didn't care about my son's narrative or my guilt, that she wanted that lake, that she wanted me to make it happen, and that if they shut me out, I was to call the number on the card and let the lawyer back me up. Have you ever felt someone's hand on your shoulder from beyond the grave, pushing you gently but firmly in a direction you've been too scared to go? That letter was her hand. I set it down, stared at the phone, at the card, at the old ghost of myself that whispered, "Just leave it. You don't deserve to push back. Let him have this." Then I pictured her, in that shiny box, under lilies that made her eyes water, in a room she left years ago, being talked about like she was someone she'd already grown out of. I pictured the lake, her laugh on the shore, her breath against my ear when she made me promise. And I knew the real turning point wasn't at the wake when my son told me to get out. It was right there, in my dark kitchen, with the phone in one hand and her letter in the other, deciding whose voice I was going to live by from now on. The one that said I'd never be anything but the man who'd failed her, or the one that said I'd finally become the man she could trust.
I must have stared at that phone for a full 5 minutes, her letter open on the table, before my thumb finally betrayed my fear and hit the numbers on the card. It rang twice, 3 times. A woman answered, calm and professional. "This is Marissa Cole." My mouth was dry. My name is Tom Harris," I said. "My wife was Anna Harris. She said you'd have some papers for her about what she wanted for after." There was a brief pause, papers rustling. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Harris." Hearing someone who had known her say her name like that almost broke me more than the wake. I swallowed. "She signed something with you?" I managed. "About cremation and the lake? She wrote me a letter. But my son, he's already arranged this big church funeral, casket, burial. He says that's what she wanted. I know it isn't. I've seen what she signed. I don't know what I'm allowed to do." "You're allowed to do exactly what she asked," Marissa said. "Your wife executed a funeral directive naming you as her agent.
That gives you the legal right to decide. The funeral home and your son should have been following that. Shame crept up my neck. I signed some of their papers, I admitted, for the casket, for the church. I thought maybe I could let him have his show and then do something small at the lake later, like it would balance out. I paused. Is it too late? She was quiet for a beat, not in a cruel way, like she was choosing words that wouldn't crush me. It complicates things, she said, but no, it doesn't erase her directive. The law looks at when she signed her wishes, not when the family made emotional decisions under pressure. Do you have time to come in and see me tomorrow morning? Yeah, I said, before my fear could say no. First thing. Bring her letter, she added, and anything you signed. We'll go through it together. When I hung up, my heart was pounding like I'd just run up a hill. Funny, considering I was just sitting at my kitchen table in a house that still smelled like her shampoo and lilies from the wake. Have you ever done something small, made a phone call, signed a paper, and known deep down that you just changed the course of the next part of your life? That's what it felt like. Like I'd nudged a train wheel back onto a different track and now had no idea what the landscape ahead would look like. The next morning, everything looked wrong because it looked normal. Sunlight coming through the kitchen window, a kid on a bike going past, a mail truck. The kind of Tuesday the world has the nerve to have when your life has been split into before and after. I put on the same suit I'd worn to the wake, tucked Anna's letter and the funeral papers into a folder, and drove to the address on the card. Marissa's office wasn't some gleaming high-rise. It was in a low brick building between a nail salon and a tax place, the kind of spot you'd walk past without noticing if you weren't looking for it. The waiting room had 2 chairs, a fake-looking plant that turned out to be real, and a stack of magazines from at least last year. She came out to get me herself. Medium height, hair pulled back, eyes with that tired kindness you only get from listening to people on the worst days of their lives for a living. "Mr. Harris?" she said. "Come on back." Her office walls had books, of course. Law books, binders, framed degrees. But there were also watercolor paintings of a lake at sunset. My lake. Our lake. "She picked you on purpose, didn't she?" I nodded toward them as I sat down. Her mouth twitched into something like a smile. "We talked about it," she said. She wanted someone who understood why the location mattered, not just the paperwork. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a crisp copy of the document Anna had signed. My name jumped out from the first line. "I hereby designate my husband, Thomas Harris, as the person authorized to make all decisions regarding the disposition of my remains and funeral arrangements." Under that, the words that had been haunting and comforting me in equal measure. "I do not want a traditional church funeral or burial. I request cremation and a simple memorial at the lakeside where my family and I spent many happy days." It was dated months before the last hospital stay, long before the meds had really scrambled her. Signed, witnessed, legal. No room for "she didn't know what she was saying" to squeeze through. My fingers tight on the edge of the paper, I said the thing I hadn't even wanted to admit to myself. What if I don't feel strong enough to fight him? My son, I spent half his life running from consequences. Now I'm supposed to stare him down and say no to the only thing he thinks he's doing right for her? "You're not fighting him," she said calmly. "You're standing up for her. Those are different things. He can be angry and grieving and still wrong about this." She picked up her phone. "I'm going to call the funeral home and the church. We'll handle the legal part. Then you can decide how to handle the emotional part. She put the funeral home on speaker, introduced herself, referenced Anna by full name. The director's voice came on, all syrup and sympathy. When she mentioned the directive, his tone tightened. "We have that on file," he conceded. "But her son is not the legal funeral agent," she cut in. "Mr. Harris is. Proceeding with burial against a written directive exposes you to liability. We're here to make sure Anna's wishes are followed." There was a pause long enough for me to imagine him looking at some screen with my wife's name on it, having realized he'd bet on the wrong decision maker. "We've already scheduled a viewing and a church service. People have been informed. The viewing can still happen if my client agrees," she said, "but final disposition will be cremation, not burial, and we will not be proceeding with any burial vault or grave purchase. As for the church, that's between the family and the pastor, but I'll be notifying him of the directive as well." She hung up and dialed Pastor Jim next. I almost asked her not to, but Anna's signature on the page in front of me held my tongue. The pastor's voice came on, softer than the funeral director's, tinged with genuine sadness. When she explained, he sighed. "I always suspected she was more at peace by that lake than in my pews," he said quietly. "If she wrote it down, I won't fight that." Relief and guilt crashed through me in a strange mix. Here was this man, the face of the tradition my son clung to, stepping aside more gracefully than my own kid probably would. "I'm still available," he added. "If the family would like to pray with them at the lake or at the house, tell them that." When she ended the call, I felt like I'd just watched 2 doors close and 1 open. The church performance was off the calendar. The burial plans were being unwound. All that was left was the part I'd been dreading most, telling my son that his version of honoring Mom wasn't the one that was going to happen. "He's going to think I went behind his back," I said, "that I couldn't stand him handling things." "You didn't go behind his back," she said. "He went around your authority. There's a difference. But he's grieving, and he sees you through the lens of your history. He probably will feel betrayed anyway. That's a separate grief you're going to have to sit with." We agreed to meet that afternoon at the funeral home. The director wanted clarity, Marissa wanted things on neutral ground. I just wanted to get through the conversation without shattering whatever fragile thread still connected me to my son. I texted him, "We need to talk about Mom's arrangements. Meet me at the funeral home at 3. The reply came fast. "Why is the funeral home saying there are changes? What did you do?" I stared at the screen, then typed, "We'll talk there. 3 p.m. 3 o'clock came too fast. He arrived like a storm in a black suit, his wife at his shoulder. The funeral director ushered us into a small side office, his professional smile barely holding. Marissa was already there, file open. My son didn't sit. He planted himself across from us, hands flat on the table. "Somebody explain to me why they're suddenly talking about cremation and canceling Mom's church service," he said, eyes locked on me. Before I could open my mouth, Marissa spoke. "Your mother executed a funeral directive," she said evenly, "legally naming your father as the person in charge of her arrangements. In that directive, she requested cremation and a memorial at the lakeside,
Not a church funeral and burial. The plans made so far contradict her written wishes. We're here to bring them into alignment." He laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound. "She would never write that," he said. "My mom hated making waves. She would never go around us like that." I pulled her letter from my folder and slid it toward him. "She did," I said quietly. "She talked to you?" he snapped. "When she was sick, on drugs. You probably pushed her into it, made it sound like some eco-friendly, cost-saving thing. You've always hated the church. Anger flared, but I kept my voice as steady as I could. She went to Marissa on her own, I said, months before she got really bad, on a day she felt strong. She made this choice with a clear head. Marissa nodded. Her capacity was not in question when she signed. I would not have proceeded otherwise. He grabbed a letter, eyes scanning. I watched him hit each section. The thanks for staying, the acknowledgement of my past, the forgiveness, the clear lines about what she did and didn't want. His jaw clenched. This doesn't sound like her, he said again, quieter this time. It sounds like you. It sounds like the woman I watched die, I said. The one who found God by the lake and in the hospice room, not in pews full of people gossiping about us. The one who told me she was tired of pretending to be the good church lady for everyone else's sake. His wife crossed her arms. So that's it? She demanded. After everything he's done for her these last weeks, you just erase her funeral? We're not erasing her funeral, Marissa said. We're making sure it's hers and not anyone else's. There can still be a gathering, words, prayer, just not in the form you assumed. My son's eyes darted to the funeral director. You're okay with this? He asked. The man shifted in his seat. We're bound to follow the legal instructions on file. Your mother's directive is clear. We should have clarified sooner who had ultimate authority. I saw it then. The moment his story cracked. Not fully, but a hairline fracture. The realization that this wasn't just Dad being controlling. That Mom, his perfect, long-suffering mom, had done something big without him. So all of that, the church, the casket, the program, gone? Adjusted, Marissa said. The viewing can still occur, if your father wishes. People can say goodbye in a room, see her one last time. But after that, she will be cremated and the main memorial will be at the lake, as she requested. He looked at me like I'd stolen something priceless. You took this from me. The one thing I could do for her. You let me plan it, pay deposits, tell everyone, and now you show up with a lawyer and some letter and rip it away. I wanted to say, I let you because I was afraid, because I didn't trust myself to stand up to you, because I didn't want to face this exact moment. Instead, I said, I didn't take anything from you. Mom gave this to me. I'm just finally doing what she asked. She gave you enough, more chances than you deserved, and now she gives you this too? Even dead, she's picking you? His voice broke on that last word. It took everything in me not to reach for him. She wasn't picking me over you, I said. She was picking the version of me she knew at the end over the version you remember from when you were a kid. Both are real. Only one gets to decide what happens to her body. He stared at the letter again, knuckles white around the paper. I still think she would have wanted the church, he muttered. Then you can light a candle there for her whenever you want, I said gently. You can go every Sunday and sing every hymn she ever liked. But this, I nodded toward the directive on the table. This part, this is hers. And I'm not breaking my promise to her to keep being the villain in your story. His eyes snapped up. You always make it about you, he said. Even now. No, I answered. For once, I'm making it about her. He swore under his breath, folded the letter in half, then in half again, like he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Do whatever you want, he said finally. Burn her. Dump her in your stupid lake. Just don't expect me to stand there and clap for you. He turned to go. I don't expect you to clap, I said to his back. I just expect you to remember one day that this is what she asked for. He paused at the door, shoulders rigid, then walked out without another word. The door clicked shut softly behind me. No dramatic slam. Somehow, that quiet exit hurt more. I sagged back in my chair, feeling 10 years older.
You did exactly what she hired me to help you do. You honored her directive. It feels less like honor and more like I just drove another wedge into my own kid. Maybe, she said. Or maybe, for the first time, you showed him a version of you that chooses something other than his approval. He may not like it. He might never say he understands it. But grief has a way of making people revisit scenes like this later, when the edges aren't as sharp. Have you ever done the right thing and immediately wished the fallout didn't hurt so much? Sitting there with a legal victory and a personal loss tangled together, I realized Anna knew this exact moment was coming. That's why she'd gone to a lawyer. That's why she'd written the letter. Not to make it easier, to make it possible. The big funeral was off. The casket was just wood and metal now, not her resting place. The church would have to keep its hymns for another day. All that was left was the lake, the ashes, and a chance to finally give her the goodbye she'd actually wanted. Even if I had to do it with my son standing at the far edge, too angry to admit he saw himself in any part of me but the worst.
For a long time, I thought the closest thing to justice I was ever going to get was staying guilty, letting people roll their eyes when my name came up, standing in the back of rooms I used to be at the center of, taking every dig my son threw at me and swallowing it like medicine I deserved. That's what guilt does. It convinces you that letting people keep stepping on you is the only proof you're really sorry. I called it making amends. Really, I was serving a life sentence I'd written for myself. Standing by that lake, watching the last of her ashes disappear into the water, I finally understood there's a difference between accepting responsibility and accepting that you're never allowed to do the right thing again. My son had every reason to hate the man I used to be. That's just the truth. I hurt him. I hurt his mother. There are years of his childhood I can't rewrite no matter how many meetings I go to or how many hospital nights I stayed sober for. But somewhere along the line, I let his version of me, Dad the screw-up, Dad the drunk, Dad the one who made Mom cry, become the only one I believed I was allowed to be. Every time he looked at me like I was dirt, I shrank a little bit more and told myself, you earned this, this is your penance. What I never stopped to think about was what that shrinking did to the people who actually believed I could be more. My wife didn't go to that lawyer because she thought I was perfect. She knew exactly who she was dealing with. She'd seen me at my worst, probably more clearly than anyone else ever will. And still, she chose me for this. She sat in some office on a day she could barely walk and signed papers that said, this man, this one here, the one who broke my heart and then spent years trying to mend it, he's the one I trust to do what I want when I can't speak for myself. If I had stayed quiet, let the big funeral roll on, let them plant her in a fancy box under flowers that made her sneeze, let the pastor talk about a version of her she'd outgrown years before, it wouldn't just have been me keeping the peace. It would have been me telling her loud and clear, you were wrong to believe I'd changed. You were wrong to put this in my hands. People love to say I did it for the kids. I got sober for the kids. I stayed in a bad marriage for the kids. I shut my mouth at every holiday for the kids. Nobody ever says one day those kids will grow up, and if you keep letting their childhood pain make every decision for you, you're going to start hurting other people you love. My son's pain was real. His story about me was real, but her wishes were real too. He had the right to be angry at his father. He did not have the right to rewrite his mother's goodbye because he liked the story where I was always wrong better than the one where she and I wrote something together at the end. That's the line I'd been too afraid to see. Not the line between right and wrong. I knew in my bones what she'd asked me to do. The line between guilt and surrender. Between saying, yes, I hurt you, and no, I won't help you hurt someone else, even if that someone else isn't here to argue. I wish someone had told me this earlier. You can carry guilt and still stand up. You can own what you did and still say, I'm not going to sit this one out just because it makes you more comfortable. Doing what Anna asked didn't erase the nights my son went to bed wondering if I'd show up at all.
It didn't make me some noble hero. It just made me a man who, for once, refused to let shame pick the easiest option. The truth is, families run on stories. My son's story about me has always been simple. Dad the screw-up, Dad the reason Mom cried at the kitchen table, Dad who doesn't get a front row seat at her funeral because he forfeited that right years ago. And for a long time, I lived down to that story because I thought it was the only honest one. But my wife wrote another version in that letter. One where I was still flawed, sure, but also the man who stayed. The man who held her hand in hospital rooms and learned how to make her tea the way the chemo didn't make her sick. The man she could look at with full knowledge of everything behind us and say, I trust you to do this for me. Choosing which story to live by didn't change the facts of my past, it changed what I did with my present. If you've spent years playing the villain in your own family saga, it's easy to think your job now is just to absorb whatever comes your way, to nod as they drag your old sins into every argument, to step back from every decision that matters because who am I to speak? But here's the thing I keep circling back to. Sometimes the person you disappoint most by staying small isn't your kid. It's the one who saw you try to be better and believed it counted. I can't tell you that what I did fixed anything between me and my son overnight. It didn't. He's still carrying a boy inside him who remembers empty seats and broken promises louder than sober years and hospital chairs. I'm still carrying a man inside me that wants to drop his eyes every time someone says, "Remember when?" That's not going away because I picked up a phone and called a lawyer. What did change is this. When I think about her now, I don't see the shiny casket and the lilies and the carpeted aisle where he told me to leave. I see the lake. I see the way the light hit the water when I opened my hand. I see my son standing just at the edge of things, hands in his pockets, angry and hurting, and in a small, grudging way, admitting that this simple, quiet, honest goodbye felt more like her than anything we did under a roof. And for me, that's enough. Enough to know that at least once I didn't choose the easier shame over the harder right. Enough to keep trying to be the man she trusted on that porch with the blanket around her shoulders. Enough to sit on that rock by the water and talk to her on the wind, hoping that one day when my son tells this story, he'll remember not just the father who failed him, but the one who finally kept a promise when it mattered most.